Freedom of press, freedom of expression, freedom of religion. These are basic rights which we take for granted here in the UK. However, in many areas across the world, fighting for these rights is a constant struggle, often resulting in death or imprisonment. Today we're extremely lucky to be joined by Kerim Balci, Turkish writer, journalist and academic who works at the Dialogue Society. Thank you so much for coming in today. We really appreciate it that you've given some time to talk to us. Tonight we're at the eve of the general election in the UK. The freedom of press has always played a major role in the outcome of the election. So as a journalist working in Turkey and also in the UK, how do you feel like this differs from in Turkey?
There's a major issue about the culture of democracy or lack of culture of democracy in many countries in the Middle East, including Turkey, unfortunately. This wasn't the case always, but at least for the last 5-7 years, the Turkish people are not informed at all about the realities of their country, about the realities of the policies of the regime in Turkey. Many people do not realize that a purge of a particular religious group or social group is taking place right in the middle of their daily lives. Many people do not realize that the Kurds are actually subjected to enforced displacement, that hundreds of thousands of Kurdish people had to leave their villages, smaller towns, and immigrate into coastal cities where they do not fit to the general cultural atmosphere there. People do not realize that the country is in economic crisis.
Lack of awareness.
There's a lack of awareness. The democracy is not just elections. It is true that Turkey has free elections, universal suffrage for the last almost 100 years and so on, compared to many other Middle Eastern countries like Syria or Iraq. I will say Turkish democracy is quite mature, but on the other hand, by means of the right to information, the Turkish public is suffering because I can say 95% of Turkish media is controlled either directly or indirectly by the president's office. That you wouldn't find here.
Wow, that is quite a staggering statistic, which we in the UK would see that's absolutely shocking. And in your interview with LBC in 2017, you described your remarkable story about why you came to the UK. So why and how, after working as a senior editor in the top newspaper in Turkey and a columnist, why did you decide to leave that all behind and come to the UK?
Well, the decision was not made by me. It was made by the presidents of Turkey. In fact, at that time, this was back in 2015, about a year before the coup attempt of 2016, I was already blacklisted because of my foreign policy opinions. I was writing on largely Middle East, Israeli-Palestinian struggle, or peace process, if you wish, or lack of it, Turkish foreign policy with Israel and so on. Already in year 2010, Turkey and Israel came head on this now infamous Mavi Marmara incident, and I was critical of the Turkish side also, not only of the Israeli side. The Turkish regime does not accept any criticism, particularly when it comes from one of their own. I'm a religious person. The Turkish regime believes that all religious Muslims are automatically their supporters, and if you do not support the Justice and Development Party, the Turkish political Islamists, you are not only an opposition figure, you are a traitor, and traitors do not have the right to life. So there were already leakages into the social media that I was going to be arrested within days. I had to escape. Well, thanks God, it came for me as a luck, because about a year later there was a coup attempt, and I was already outside Turkey. If I was not, I would most probably be jailed together with my friends like Ahmet Altan and Nazlı Ilıcak, who are all convicted to life sentence in jail.
Wow, that is incredible. So Turkey, I understand, has become increasingly religious since President Erdogan's re-election in 2014, and he wants to create a religion essentially valuing religion over more Western secular values. And as a religious Muslim yourself, do you think that religion should play a role in policy making?
Well, first of all, before answering this question, there is something missing in the question itself. Turkey is not becoming more religious. in fact, by means of daily observance of religious values and rituals, Turkey is becoming more and more profane, let me say, not secular, but profane. The difference is secularism has something to do with administrative style also. It's not only about lifestyle, it's also a political issue, whereas profane lifestyle refers only to your daily life. So Turkish Muslims, even when they speak about external expression of religiosity like headscarf of ladies or beard and mustache of men, they do not uphold the religious values of Islam. So in that sense, the Turkish religiosity is becoming more and more materialistic, and it is devoid of the values itself. It may come to our listeners as a kind of oxymoron, because if you are a religious person, you usually believe that it automatically morality comes together with religion. Well, unfortunately, the current experience in Turkey have taught me a very painful lesson that religion and morality does not come automatically together. We do have quite religious people, but immoral people back in Turkey, including the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. When we come to the second part of the question, whether religion should have a place in public life, certainly it has to, because it is the value system of people. People must be free to express their religious views in the public sphere also, not only in private sphere. In some of the Western countries like France, for example, religious feelings and thoughts have been imprisoned to the private sphere, and together with social media, the balance between private and public sphere is disturbed in the advantage of the public sphere. In fact, almost our bedrooms are already a public sphere. No longer we have real private sphere. Then this means there's no sphere for religiosity. But when it comes to political sphere, it's something completely different. I do believe that an Anglo-Saxon secular regime is the best for religious people also. A religion can prosper under only secular conditions. I have seen how when politicians usurp the religious rhetoric, it destroys the very values of religiosity itself. I have seen this in Israel, where, for example, the Orthodox understanding of Judaism is imposed upon other sections and so on. I have seen this in Iran, where a particular understanding of Islam is imposed upon the overall population and so on. And this is precisely what we are observing in Turkey nowadays. Turkey is not becoming more and more religious. It's becoming more and more Sunni. It's becoming more and more Hanafi. A particular interpretation of Islam is imposed upon the people. Whereas Turkish Islam used to be quite a heterogeneous Islam. We used to have Shiites, Alevites, Nasturis, Nusayris, amazing libertarian religious movements and so on. Some of them are back in jail now. Some of them are afraid of declaring their religious feelings. So there is this process of homogenization of religious identity in Turkey, and that is dangerous.
So because there's so many different groups, there's a risk of one group essentially imposing their ideology on everyone, and I think that's very dangerous.
That is precisely what the Turkish President Erdogan is doing. He's not saying, be religious as you understand it, be religious as I understand it, he says. That is imposition of religion. I do believe that whenever religious people use religion in order to come to politics and stay in political positions, this actually corrupts both politics and religion, and usually religion suffers more than politics.
So moving on to a slightly different theme, you also mentioned how, and I know the protests against Trump visiting the UK, for example, are far more vocal or have much higher attendance than the protests when President Erdogan was visiting the UK. Do you think this is simply because of publicity or something to do with Turkey's human rights records? Why do you think that this is?
Well, the point is this. First of all, the United Kingdom is not in a normal period. We are passing through a traumatic experience of Brexit, leavers and remainers and so on. I am somebody who's observing from outside. I'm not a Brexiteer or a Remainer, but I can see that the polarization in this society is at alarming levels. And when people are protesting against Donald Trump, for example, their protest is actually going towards the Brexit camp. It's not about Donald Trump himself. It's about the fact that Donald Trump supported current government in this country, and the left has a certain distaste of current government. Well, there are things that needed to be protested about Donald Trump, but these are not about freedom of expression or democratic values and so on. Donald Trump represents a new phenomenon in world politics. He's not alone, first of all. He is frontrunners of a new populist right-wing politics. And his decisions in White House have told and taught to world leaders that whatever you do in power is right. In fact, it had to be opposite. Whatever is right, you have to do it. That's a dangerous process. And the fact that the United Kingdom and the United States of America are so much so, almost two countries of one nation, it's obviously understandable why British people are more interested in what's going on in Washington, D.C. or New York compared to what's going on in Istanbul or Ankara. On the other hand, American press is still a free press, despite the fact that Donald Trump had accused journalists in the United States of being enemies of people and so on. This is still at rhetorical level. We have not seen any journalists jailed in the United States. Hopefully it will never happen. That free press is telling to the world in English language what's going on in the United States, and the British people are not happy with what's going on. British left, let me say. Whereas we don't have that same appeal, same information channel when it comes to Turkey. Many people here in the United Kingdom do not realize what's going on in Turkey, and they don't realize that what's going on in Turkey actually will eventually come to London. Now, it's eventually turned into an immigration wave that will influence our lives here in the United Kingdom. When the Turkish regime starts kidnapping, hijacking, or even executing opposition voices in Western capitals, we will realize to what we kept silent. And unfortunately, at the time being, the British public is uninformed, and I can say I do have to blame myself about that also, because I had the luxury to be here and to be able to speak in English and to be able to tell the people what's going on. But it's not an easy time to speak to the British people about things other than Brexit. When I do join political party conferences, all of them, and it's almost impossible to get people's attention about an issue that relates to Turkey or sometimes even human rights issues when there is an alternative about Brexit. Obviously and understandably, people do prefer to listen about it. Hopefully in the short run we will overcome this, and then we will be able to speak about the future where some version of an ethical foreign policy will be adopted, whichever government comes to power here.
And just leading on from that, you talk about the rising hatred or divide within Britain, and we've seen that in this general election it's generally depicted as being more unpleasant or more nasty, with more sniping between political parties. And at a time where hatred seems to be on the rise with increased anti-Muslim hate or increased anti-Semitism, do you think there are any actions we can do or any changes we can make to try and achieve a better United Kingdom and a better world?
Well, first of all, let me say a few words about the intrinsic relationship between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is generic hatred. Any kind of xenophobia matures into anti-Semitism in the end. So if we have anti-Islamic sentiments or Islamophobia in a society, eventually it will metamorph into anti-Semitism, one form or another. So first of all, Muslims and Jews and concerned non-believers, Christians and so on in this country have to realize that the danger of xenophobia is a common danger. It's a common challenge. We have to fight with it together. Denial of Islamophobia or denial of anti-Semitism, which does exist in both camps, is actually diminishing our potential to collaborate on this issue. That's one issue. On the other hand, all religious people have the responsibility to connect to the overall host culture here. You know, I'm an immigrant in this society. I do have a responsibility to tell and to show with my acts, activities, and so on to this host society that I am here to be a part of this society, to be a good citizen, to contribute to the overall wealth of this society, and of course to benefit from the wealth of this society. This is sometimes lacking in some of the immigrant populations. So in that sense, I think religious communities do homeworks that they have to do at home, but there are homeworks that we need to do together also. Something that is lacking, and in fact that's a challenge for all religious communities, is about the inability to deliver the message to the younger generation. You know, I am visiting synagogues, I'm visiting churches and the mosques, and with every day the number of young, visitors are diminishing. This means our societies are becoming more and more less interested in religion, or less interested in the overall value of a religious identity. That's a challenge that we need to fight. We need to fight together.
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying, particularly among the youth, to try and raise awareness about these issues that burst the bubble, and try and promote young people getting involved and getting active and actually gaining an understanding of this.
I believe the Jewish communities of the Western countries have another duty to help the new coming religious communities, because they have had this experience much earlier. 1,000 years ago, the Jewish communities came to the West, and they experienced the Enlightenment and so on. So early movements within the Jewish community about assimilation and integration without assimilation, or resistance and so on, they have learned valuable lessons. And as somebody, a Muslim that came from my comfort zone, let me say, very recently, I am looking at the experiences of the Jewish community and trying to learn from their experience. How did they overcome the problems? It's not easy. Many Muslim young children are not feeling at ease to express their religious identity. They don't want their moms, if their mothers are headscarf, to come to school to pick them up from the school, because they think their distinctive religious identity is a threat. In fact, it is a richness. It is actually something that we give to this society. And this society has to be thankful about that heterogeneous identity and so on. But you wouldn't expect a 7-year-old child to realize that his or her religious identity is a gift to this society. But we have to teach them.
And again, just following on about us here in the UK and us as individuals, as a country, some people might say that by, say, stopping trade with China because of the persecution, it might conflict with our own interests, or with Turkey, that obviously they make up a powerful NATO ally, and by stopping trade or decreasing relations with them, we're actually going against our own interests in that respect. So what would you say to those sorts of people who would argue that because of this, there's nothing essentially we can do as a country to try and combat this?
Well, that's an issue that pops up whenever you make a criticism of a, say, trade agreement with a dictatorial country, an authoritarian regime, or sales of arms to, say, Saudi Arabia, for example, on the face of the fact that the British-made missiles are used against Yemenite populations where children are killed and so on. And usually we hear that what do you want us to do? Cut off the ties altogether and then push them to the Middle East and so on. If we have better friendly relations, at least we can say a few words to them, or lean them towards a better position and so. This is the dilemma. The point is this: you raised the Turkish issue, for example. I have been speaking with politicians here, ministers and secretaries of state, saying, look, your relations with Turkey are important because Turkey is an important country. We need to keep Turkey in NATO. Otherwise, Vladimir Putin is waiting there. You know, he is quite satisfied with the fact that Turkey is becoming more and more pro-Russian country, and this is a huge challenge to our security in the West. It's not only about Turkey. It's all about the all Atlantic alliance. It's about the NATO alliance. You know. Well, only a week ago here, the leaders of NATO countries were in this country celebrating 70th anniversary of the establishment of NATO. We have seen that Turkey continued on buying S-400 missiles from Russia. This is a ground-to-air defense system, which is very successful defense, is much better than its American similar. But the point is, there's also the fact that Turkey's human rights records say something. You know, we cannot keep silent about this. So that's always a dilemma. I cannot come out and say, you know, cut off all trade ties with Turkey, push Turkey out of NATO. Turkey is no longer a valid member of NATO alliance because NATO is not just an alliance of security and defense. It is also an alliance of values, and Turkey is not fitting to those values. Yes, it is true, but the alternative is not better. The alternative is pushing Turkey towards a Russian or Chinese, or even worse, a kind of anarchistic state. We have to understand that there is 50% of Turkish people, at least 50% of Turkish people, who are still looking to the West as their best alternative. So we shouldn't abandon that 50% of the society, but the relationships has to be always conditioned. We do know that there are certain military equipment Turkey is buying from United Kingdom. Turkey is the fourth largest customer of UK-made weapons. Some of them are indispensable for Turkish defense industry. So when you feel yourself indispensable, you can ask for something. This has been done by Germany. Germany is selling tanks to Turkey, and in return for arms sales, Germany managed to have German citizens who are in jail in Turkey, they are dual citizens of Turkey and Germany, released, and they were let to go back to Germany. Whereas there are British citizens who are in jail in Turkey, and this government is not using its leverage about arms sales, for example. Well, my listeners will say, well, Kerim Balci is not looking at the issue from only human rights perspective. Yes, I'm not looking to the issue only from the human rights perspective. I want Turkey to stay as a Western ally in the NATO alliance because the alternative is much more dangerous, not only for Turkey or Turkish people, it's dangerous for the Middle East, it is dangerous for the Balkans, and it is eventually dangerous for the United Kingdom.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for, but it's been really interesting, and I can say honestly, 6 months ago, I knew pretty much next to nothing about this issue, and from researching and from talking to you, I've learned a huge amount more about this issue, and it's something that, as a society, I feel we need to focus not just introspectively on ourselves, but also on things happening to other people in other countries. I think you do an amazing job. Obviously, you've got a very powerful voice when talking about these issues, and I'd just like to say thank you again for coming in and sharing your story and talking to us today, and I hope everyone who's watching enjoyed it as much as I did. If you'd like to carry on seeing these really enjoyable and engaging videos, you can subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, Burst the Bubble UK, or follow us on Instagram. So thank you very much, and until next time, goodbye.